Well, I guess before we get started, we'll just do a brief introduction. This is the relaunch of Ideas on the Verge, and this is my first time, and you're my first guest, so it's an honor to have you here.
Right
And I'm
on.
quite
Thank you.
excited, and Rob and Michelle, they're quite excited as well. And just a word from New Society Publishers as well. And so this is a partnership with New Society, and they're bringing this into fruition. And to support us, they are offering one lucky viewer that will be chosen by Ben, who is managing all the comments in here. They'll get a copy of DIY Kombucha by Andrea Potter. So make sure you stay engaged and comment a lot, and then yeah, you'll get an ebook if you're the lucky pick by Ben the Book Angel. Awesome. Well, yeah, it's great to have you here. I'm excited, and I was looking through your website today, malcolmsaunders.com. And there was a little bit in there that resonated with me quite well. And you were explaining as how you were a teenager, you were eating a lot of pizza, like microwave pizza and grilled cheese. And I've similarly gone through a similar food journey where you take a hard look at what you're putting in your body and how you feel and try to make that change. And it can be quite overwhelming. So I'm wondering if you could please talk about how your journey has unfolded, what you've done, what you've learned, and how long it's taken you, because I think it's a pretty common misconception that you can just flip a switch and all of a sudden you're a health guru and you know what to do. And so if you could distill some of that journey for some of the viewers, that'd be fantastic.
Yeah, awesome. Okay, wonderful. And thanks again for having me on. So
Yeah, absolutely.
basically, my food journey began when I was 16, and it was born not out of an inspiration to eat better at all. It was literally kind of from an environmental standpoint. I was that guy in the class that would tell you to use both sides of the paper, very kind of eco-conscious. And as today, there's so many documentaries. Back then it was more books that I was reading, influencing my ideas around, how do we show up in the world? How do I kind of reconcile my love of nature and this kind of doom and gloom report, listening to people like David Suzuki. The answer was, oh, you become a vegetarian. So I did that. I literally went overnight from eating meat, potatoes, and junk food to just potatoes and junk food. And it didn't go so well. So that woke me up to the fact that, oh, there's something more to food than whatever was quick, easy, and tasted good, because that's how I navigated food. It was purely on taste and convenience, the packaging, the look, all that kind of stuff. And that was a big wake up call for me. And mom at the time, she was going through the divorce, and she's not like, I support you, but I can't help you. Like, she was kind of emotionally involved and engaged, and nor did she know how or what to do with her, teenager son who says declaring he's becoming a vegetarian. And so I was on my own. And, the extent of my culinary abilities were, like, literally, as you mentioned, I'm sure many of us can relate, Pop-Tarts, grilled cheese, microwave pizza, breakfast cereals, that kind of thing. And that's the footing, that's the foundation that I had stepping off, trying to learn how to nourish and feed myself. And it was kind of a steep learning curve, and it took a long time. So, here I am more than a couple decades later, and so much wiser. Fast forward, the spoiler alert, I'm no longer a vegetarian. And what I had thought, even though I pursued that for more than 10 years, close to 15 years, in every kind of variation of it, right? Like vegetarian, vegan, raw vegan, kept trying to go down the rabbit hole of this, try this, cleanse a little bit more. And that was great. It's all part of my journey. But where I arrived was being a flexitarian, or what my friend Yarrow Will likes to describe, an opportunivore, and really kind of embodying more that kind of 80-20 rule. And everything I thought about, being a vegetarian, especially in regards to, environmentalism, and then of course, as it started to relate to kind of health and the effect of these types of foods, I realized it was more of a half truth. And I know, Rob Avis from Verge Permaculture, he does a great job as well, kind of dispelling that myth of the vegetarian. In fact, one of the influential books that I read that helped kind of correct some of my thinking was The Vegetarian Myth. But it took a long time, and it took my body, speaking to me, telling me through signs and signals that, you might intellectually think you have it all figured out and this is the path and I'm on this self-righteous, I'm a vegetarian. My body was trying to tell me otherwise. This isn't working, right? Every time I look in the mirror, I didn't see a reflection of health. So I kept trying something else. Okay, maybe if I do this, maybe if I do that, and changing. And I don't regret the journey I was on at all. It made me who I am, and I've learned so much along the way. And now my mission is to help others find and learn how to craft their own food and medicine, hopefully in a much shorter time period than I took. And so I've developed some principles that I've picked up along the way, which I'd love to share today. I know we're going to get into some of that.
Oh, absolutely.
Maybe I can start off the idea of the 4 food groups, right?
Yeah.
Now, if we think about the 4 food groups as it's been shared culturally within our standard North American culture, which I think has drastically failed us as a society. The fact that you and I can relate that as teenagers, we are very typical of the average teenager that eats that type of diet, doesn't know how to properly nourish themselves. And I don't know about you, but I was experiencing a lot of symptoms. I had really bad acne, time of your, you're supposed to have all your youth in your all that energy. I could barely make it through a day. And once I did go vegetarian, I had a lot of blood sugar issues that were underlying on the surface, and my diet just kind of exacerbated that. So, as a whole, I think we can all agree that we're not quite on track with our diet know-how. And I've learned a lot from a lot of people along the way, including Michael Pollan, New York Times food writer, amazing guy, and he says he feels that traditional cultures have far more to teach us than does, government or industry, which are our primary influences currently. So, of course, here we are, we're in school, grade 2, you're given the 4 food groups, you're given Canada Food Guide. Not very helpful, obviously, because of just look at the results. So it turns out that there are, in fact, 4 food groups that all humans all around the earth throughout time do, in fact, eat from. But it's not the ones we learned in school. And what I love about them is it doesn't tell you what to eat, when to eat, how much to eat. That is all has to be an intuitive process, because it's not a mechanistic thing. Things are changing all the time, right? Especially if you live in Alberta and Calgary. I mean, last week it was winter, this week we've gone back to autumn. And so it's seasonal eating. It's also seasonal in terms of stages of life, right? Mm-hmm. If we look at traditional cultures, and if we really want to gather the wisdom that they had, and I'll put that in context when we get to another section that puts cultural wisdom into context. So we'll get there. It's not like that they had everything right and we just need to eat like our ancestors. We need to apply a little bit more intelligence and wisdom to our context today. But if we do look at them, culture encodes food and nutrition information that has helped people stay healthy and alive and successfully reproduce generation after generation. So we can definitely take a hint, take a clue from that. I know I was kind of partway through my journey at one point, feeling totally lost. I'd been traveling in India and I came back and I was, I'm sure I picked up parasites and I was feeling not so good, and I visited a local herbalist here, Dr. Terry Willard, and he said to me, Malcolm, if you ever get confused about what to eat, just go back to what your ancestors ate. I says, what? The Scottish? They're not known for having a good diet.
Yeah.
Right? But, here's the thing, that's the modern version of the Scottish diet has earned them, top, if it's not top 1, maybe it's top 2 or 3 for sure, of countries with the highest rates of heart disease, like an obesity, not the culture to model your diet after. But if we look traditionally, there is actually a ton of wisdom there versus the modern diet. And again, Michael Pollan says, the only reliably bad cultural diet is the modern industrialized diet, the standard American diet.
Yeah.
So
I love Michael Pollan's, because I watched Cooked, and his one saying is like, you can eat as much junk food, cake, cookies as you want, just make it yourself.
Yeah.
And it's like, yeah, of course, like, because what is going into those foods that we're all buying, well, not all, but a lot of people are buying, it's just crap.
Yeah.
And
it's edible food-like substances. That's another
Yeah.
Michael Pollan quote, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I can definitely resonate with the potatoes and junk food, because I went through a similar phase. I was like, I'm going to go vegetarian because it's better for the environment. And all of a sudden I was just eating potatoes and baked beans. And I went through a lot of problems. I just lost so much weight. I had no energy. I looked crazy, more crazy than I do now. And yeah, it was not fun.
Yeah.
But you touched on these 4 food groups.
Yeah.
So what are they?
Okay, awesome. So turns out you can also view these as the 4 kingdoms of life. Now, not technically, because I know that there are 6, but loosely we can look at it as plants. And just as I go through each of these, again, I love it because it doesn't tell you what to eat, how much to eat, or when to eat. And as we go through them, we really need to look at the qualitative difference, right? So as you and I went into this idea of vegetarianism and coming out of it, it's like, oh, okay, chicken is not chicken, right? Like there's a qualitative difference. And I think that the single biggest mistake we took with our kind of food and food choices and our diet is the industrialization of our food system. And no doubt, I don't want to say it's black and white and it's all, bad, but generally, the industrialization of our food system was a poor choice. Fortunately, there is now that resurgence back, right? Where, as my friend Rob Sinclair likes to say, we're moving from Wall Street to Main Street. There is that relocalization and that, back to craft, back to artisan. And that's a key piece. So yes, as we talk about each of these food groups, just know that, quality is number one. So always seeking the best, highest quality. And there's various defining factors for depending on what the food is, but the more kind of smaller scale, closer to home, and certainly less industrialized, the better. And I was about to use that word processed, but because again, one of my wrong beliefs about food was like, oh, processed food, no, that's a dirty word, can't eat processed foods. Well, in fact, humans, that's what we do, we process food. And there, of course, there are different ways to process it, by hand, with machines, industrializing, and there's that whole scale to consider. So to keep that in mind, and keep in mind the diversity within that. So one of the benefits that I got from being a vegetarian, there were so many silver linings to my learning, was a diversification of the plant foods I was eating. Like going into it, to say I was a vegetarian is not accurate at all. I was more of a carbitarian. It was cookies, it was bread, it was pasta. Like I wasn't eating vegetables, I wasn't eating vegetation in that sense, and certainly not a diversity of it. And that's another issue that's happened within our modern society and the industrialized food system. The variety is actually extremely limited. Both in a kind of like a really obvious context. I never watched the film, but a friend he told me, he's like, yeah, it's like, have you ever watched that film King Corn? And I haven't watched it, but apparently the premise is these guys make a movie about the kind of this joke, the idea that, everything's made out of corn.
Which is incredibly scary when we've got a monocrop that so much of our food is based off of, and one disease could just wipe it out.
For sure.
That's fragile.
Yeah.
That's so fragile.
So one of the early, tips that I got, I'd moved off to college, and here I am still in my journey trying to figure things out. And I had a roommate that was, several years older, further down the path into kind of like health and nutrition. And just the simplest little insight. He's like, Malcolm, stick to the perimeters of the grocery store, right? Explore the produce section, but, eliminate all those middle aisles where it's basically just different versions of corn packaged up in different ways. So it is about diversity with plants.
Absolutely.
So one kind of quick, easy kind of hack to think about diversity is, especially in the plant kingdom, is eat the rainbow, right? So within the plant kingdom,
colors.
Yeah, colors, right? Which are representative of phytonutrients, plant nutrients, these antioxidants, and every single color. I mean, you can really dive deep into the microcosm of it and like, okay, sure, we know orange is beta carotene and green is chlorophyll, but there's so much there. It's Roy G. Biv, black, white, brown, and oftentimes white foods are demonized, but no, there's actually nutrients in naturally white foods like white onions. That aren't
potatoes.
Yeah, potatoes, right? Absolutely. So eating the rainbow is a huge kind of key to be able to unlock, right? That's an easy hack. The whole perspective I'm at with nutrition now, even though it's been an absolute focus of my life for more than 2 decades, and I've even studied it formally, I study it informally, I have titles and degrees, which by the way I never use. I don't call myself a nutritionist, and I don't want to, because it puts this illusion that like, oh, because I know and I'm an expert, and you have to be an expert to learn how to feed yourself. No, this should be the most kind of simple, intuitive thing possible. Unfortunately, it's not, but we can get back on track, and we can get there with these just kind of simple, intuitive clues. And I know we're going to reference Michael Pollan again, but his book, Food Rules, these kind of simple, like common sense, intuitive little nuggets. He wrote a book called Food Rules that's just full of them, right? So Eat the Rainbow is an example. I don't think it's in his book, but as an example and a motto that I kind of live by and share when it comes to plant foods. The other element of plant foods and that whole kingdom is explore the world of herbs. So be your own herbalist. Where's that line between food and medicine? What's a vegetable? What's a herb? And we can get into that. Like, what is that distinction? It's a fine line. And even for myself, getting into the world of food, nutrition, I had kind of put the blinders on. I was like, oh, I'm going to be a nutritionist. And I had friends, like one of my best friends is Yara Willard, who's a 2nd generation herbalist. Him and his father, Terry, are quite well known within that realm. And I always viewed them as like, well, they're the herbalists, right? They're the experts. I mean, look, his dad's like a world famous herbalist and he's going to school. And I'm just going to stick in my lane of being a nutritionist, because that's going to be my expertise. And that's what I know. And that limited myself. And again, nutrition should be accessible. So should our own kind of medicine practice, to be your own herbalist, right? If you want to be someone else's herbalist, if you want to recommend and help people through their healing journey, absolutely, go to school, apprentice, develop that knowledge. But when it comes to you, when it comes to me and our own individual journey and helping ourselves and our family, we need to be our own herbalists, because herbal medicine is the people's medicine. And a great quote by David Wolfe. He says, herbalism is nothing more than the institutionalization of wild food intuition, right? And this intuition that we all have, and it's a combination of intuition as well as cultural wisdom, and all that would have been passed on. And it's kind of in our modern industrialized societies. I don't know how far back we go. Maybe it's the witch burnings, right? Like there's always been a bit of a kind of a purge or a demonizing of that type of knowledge and way of life. And it continues today. But we all have it within us, and we all need to utilize the world of plant medicine. And here's another little insight that I got from another herbalist friend of mine, Blaine Andrewsiak. He says, Malcolm, like here's a little clue for you. He says, think about the term herbal practice, herbal practitioner, just the same as a medical practitioner, right? It's a practice. Start practicing herbal medicine. And the more you practice, the better you'll get. And again, it's about you, and it's about your own journey with that. And whether that is just purely kind of preventive or even curative, I mean, there's going to be a whole spectrum on that. And most of us, have experience with that, even if it's as simple as, I need a little bit of peppermint tea, to kind of clear things up and relieve digestion, or have a bit of ginger. I mean, that is the practice of herbal medicine in its most simplistic form, right? Like sleepy time chamomile tea. And of course, there's much more depth that we can take that to. And that's the possibilities that we have with our own life and our own health journey, is that we take that path and we start building our knowledge, and we follow what Stephen Buhner says, our golden threads, right?
Yeah.
Things start to come up, and it's like, I keep hearing about reishi mushroom. What's that all about, right? Hey, follow that golden thread. And when it comes to herbs,
cool. I love
the
that.
key thing is, it's a very common thing in the herbal practitioner world. They say compliance is key. That means is the herbs don't work unless you take them.
Yeah.
And what I like to emphasize is, I've got a friend, Robert Rogers. He's based out of Edmonton. This man has literally written, he's close to 50 books. 50 books this man's written.
Quite productive.
And it's not like they're like pamphlets. It's like they are like thick, like serious. Like one of his more recent books, there's over 1,000 scientific references in there. And this is what people often say, like my dad, he one told me, he says, Malcolm, I don't believe in herbs. Oh, really? I don't even know what that means, right? You don't believe in herbs, right? And I think what he's getting at is like, wow, there's no scientific validation for it. That is so false, right? There's a ton of science, and this man is very well referenced, very well experienced. So he's written close to 50 books, all on plant medicine, fungal medicine. And here's the thing, encyclopedic knowledge, right? I love going on plant walks with him. We'll be out, exploring, we'll take groups out, and you can literally point at any plant in the forest, right? Whether it's a tree, whether it's a bush, whether it's, a berry, and he'll tell you, the common name, the Latin name, properties and benefits, and he'll start kind of recounting stories of in his clinical practice, how, so-and-so had this going on, we suggested this, and, here's how it moved them forward, and da-da-da-da-da. Incredible encyclopedic knowledge of plant medicine and everything that grows around us. Now, here's the neat thing, is as much as he knows, as much as we can put him on a pedestal for all that knowledge and praise him, it's wonderful. When it comes to taking the herbs, you and I and him are actually all in the exact same level playing field when it comes to receiving the benefits. So you can know a little, or you can know a lot, and take that journey to kind of build and deepen your knowledge. But again, herbs don't work unless you take them.
Yeah, and you commented that in your book too, which yeah, it's a great read, by the way.
Cool, right on. And so here's another quick little tip as you get into exploring the realm of plants, eating the rainbow, considering herbs almost as like a sub food group within the realm of plants. As you get into it, follow those golden threads. Maybe it's whatever you're so fancy, right? You're hearing about turmeric. You have a great experience with reishi. Like, do those. Go after what I call the exotics and the erotics.
And it's so important. Like these golden threads, not only will they make you feel good, but they're so much fun to taste. Like this is not wine. This is actually the soda I was telling you about when I was at the Light Cellar the other day. The blackcurrant, ginger, green oat straw, and pine pollen.
Awesome.
Not only does it taste good, but it's super fun to make. My roommates come home, they're like, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "I'm making soda."
Right on.
I'm doing that, and it's delicious. It's barely any sugar, and it makes you feel good.
Totally. Yeah. And that's the idea of like herbal medicine is as a practice, it can be in so many different forms. It's not just, I got to drink herbal tea and take tinctures. You can find all these different delivery, systems that are crafts, right? That you can get into. We probably won't talk about it today, but the idea of brewing beer. I mentioned Stephen Buhner. He's my herbal hero, this guy. He's written probably about, he might be in the realm of 15 books now. And one of them, my favorite, is Sacred and Herbal Healing Beers. And it's all about the craft of using beer, whether that's a very small percentage of alcohol to something higher, more like a wine. And he uses the term beer very kind of generally and liberally to anything that's alcoholic. Every single culture around the world well, there might be one or two exceptions, but literally almost every culture around the world had alcohol as a part of their daily diet, or within that spectrum. And it was used as a delivery system for herbs. They were sacred and they were healing herbal beers. So we can have fun with that. We can get into the, that type of craft, and that's exciting. So this is kind of where the 80-20 comes in, right? So 80%, yes, the bulk of your calories are going to be, from those local, locally grown, the farmer, you go to the farmer's market, you grow it yourself, anything kind of fresh. It's very key that we get those as locally sourced foods. And then the 20%, that's the fun foods, right? It's the spice of life. You mentioned ginger. I could mention black pepper, coffee, right? Things that have been traded throughout time all around the world. As much as I'm into the 100-mile diet, I'm not about to give up ginger, right? I don't think we should. And it comes to, ginseng, as it comes to all these other things, it's kind of the spice of life. And it's that 20%, the exotics and the erotics that we can add in. And here's something for the permaculture crowd that I know some are already exploring is, so knowing myself, if you don't know, I run a little superfood shop here in Calgary. We're in Bowness, and we have items, products from all around the world. Again, exotic herbs, all the way to locally made ferments that we make in the basement, a whole spectrum. And some of our top sellers are things like Schizandra berry, that has been known and revered throughout the Chinese herbal medicine system for thousands of years, that is mostly grown and produced out of China. That's a fantastic herb, and you can find good quality, but you can also find not great quality. And some people are like, China, no, not even going there. I don't even care if it's supposedly good quality. But here's the thing, one of our best top sellers is somebody got wise and they say, you know what? I'm going to grow that in North America. So they've taken this herb and they've started to grow it organically, in Massachusetts, USA. And they produce, I would argue, it is the best Schizandra in the world, because they've brought it to the West and they've applied these permaculture principles and they're growing it, and the quality is phenomenal. Rhodiola, Alberta is one of the best growing regions for rhodiola in the world. It's not native to here, but it can thrive in this climate. So we can take some of these exotic things, right? There's a lot of ginseng growers in Ontario and a couple in BC, and there's a real potential for that as a market, right? So if you're a farmer, if you're getting into permaculture and you're looking at, okay, how do I make a livelihood? Yes, absolutely. You can do, kind of the farmer's market type stand, or you can kind of niche into some of these areas, like growing goji berries or whatever it is. And there's a real potential there.
Cool.
So let's, here's my tip for the herbs. So have fun, right? It's like, I'm going to explore like pine pollen. I'm really into yoga. What were the Ayurvedic people into? What were the yogis doing for herbs? You can learn that, you can explore that, you can get into all different kinds of traditions. And it's an incredible thing that in this day and age, not only we have access to the knowledge, right? Like literally, like you could become a master of Amazonian herbs. You could become a master of Chinese herbs, Ayurvedic herbs, Eastern European herbs. Like literally, pick a culture, pick a tradition, that whatever inspires you. Maybe it's your ancestors, and you want to go deep into all the great herbs of Greece. Awesome, go for it. And begin to explore and connect with the plants that grow in your local bioregion. I always think, and I take people out on plant walks, it's like, all right, what would you do if the grocery store didn't exist, or the pharmacy didn't exist, right? Because that was the reality of people that lived on this land for how many hundreds or thousands of years. And they had everything available, right? No matter where you are on the globe, people have existed without the kind of the modern, forms of food and medicine that we had, and they relied purely on what they could hunt or gather. And that really interests me from a nourishment perspective as well as a medicine perspective. So begin to explore what grows around you. Take some, wild crafting courses, local foraging, pick up a plant ID book, and very, very empowering. So,
Sorry, if people wanted to take these steps to learn these things, I imagine the Light Cellar is one place you could go. Are there any, what are the options for people who are a little bit, they don't know, but they want to know? I definitely identify as one of those people. I want to know what plant I'm looking at, how I can use that. So you mentioned plant walks. Do you do those quite often, or?
Yeah, so we do them seasonally. Though absolutely, plant medicine is available 365 days a year. It's a practice. It's learning the seasons and the plants and what's available, right? You can utilize a plant every day of the year, but it's often giving you or the opportunity to harvest different parts or aspects of it at different seasons. So we normally do plant walks during the summer. Mm-hmm. That being said, there are tons of great resources throughout Calgary. And I know we got listeners that are beyond Calgary, so I want to share some kind of online resources. My friend Yarrow Willard, I mentioned earlier, he's got a handle on YouTube called Herbal Jedi. And his videos, they're short, they're fun, they're super informative. And he's out there in the forest. He's like checking out the mushrooms, and he's showing you goldenrod and, all these different things. So you can learn the ID, the benefits, the properties from things like just, hanging out and watching YouTube channels. When you possibly might want to take it further, maybe you want to get enrolled in a course. Wild Rose College is a great resource. And they do primarily focus on, Western herbs. You'll get a little bit of kind of the more exotic stuff and a lot of focus on local as well. So just off the top, those are two great resources.
Cool. So we've touched on the animals and plant two food groups. What are the other two?
We've only talked about plants.
We talked about chicken a little bit, but.
Oh yeah, for sure. So the next one, let's get through them here. So it's plants and then it's animals. Yeah. Now animals, the quick key to that is quality, like we talked about, right? It's what system is it coming from? And a really good example of that is, fats, right? Like butter has been demonized for how long? And slowly we're making the turn around that. But this idea of like, let's take butter as an example. On the one hand, depending on the system that it comes from, if it's a grain-fed cow where they're feeding them things like cottonseed and like soybean and corn and things that they're not meant to actually eat, but somehow stimulates milk production, you end up with a food at the end result that's actually really high in omega-6. It's quite inflammatory versus grass-fed. And this is the whole trend behind grass-fed butter. It's actually really high in omega-3s, and it's incredible anti-inflammatory. And it's literally like two different foods. We can't just say, oh, butter is bad. Yeah, chicken is bad. Look at the system that it comes from. And then the other real key for those of us that are whole foodists, right? Like, yeah, I'm into whole foods. Absolutely. And it took a while to make that connection to animals is, I better be eating the whole animal. And again, there is that resurgence now back to whole animal eating and cookery. And it makes sense. I mean, there are aspects of the whole animal that offset different parts of it. If you're just eating muscle meats and steaks all the time, certain deficiencies are going to develop or certain toxicity that can be developed. So it's the organs, it's the bones, it's that nose to tail that's incredibly important.
Yeah, I recently, well, not recently, a couple of years ago, I started really getting into oxtail soup, and I think that's my favorite thing to make ever. I worked on the soup for years, and it's just become my own elixir almost. I don't know if it would, under your definition, fall under an elixir, but it's my epitome of health, and it's awesome. Totally. And I think what you're saying earlier, as humans, we often say you are what you eat, but we only apply that to ourselves, and we don't apply that to what we're eating. Like,
right?
Duh.
Yeah, you are what you eats is. And then there's another phrase, it's not the cow, it's the how, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so let's move on. Animals as well includes diversity because, again, most of us, it's chicken, beef, pork, very limited number of species and very limited number of parts from those species. Oh, fish, I guess, would be the other top one. But, what type of fish? Well, there's a huge diversity, and there's huge diversity of number of different types of animals and breeds and heirloom for plants, animals, all that stuff. So should be fairly obvious for people to get into and explore that. Now, the two that are maybe less obvious, the last two remaining food groups are, more of like the underworld. A lot of people feel uncomfortable about them, and that would be bacteria and fungi. So by bacteria, I mean fermented foods, the products of fermentation. So taking plant foods, animal foods, fermenting them, eating those foods, and literally the bacteria themselves. And this is kind of on the backs of, we are kind of a symbiotic organism. We're not just a human. Well, what is a human? Well, we're a symbiosis of different organisms, bacteria, viruses, and that's what makes us who we are. And our diet is key in terms of replenishing that. There's also a practical function in terms of the preservation that fermentation provides. There's a pre-digestion element that happens. Like, how many people do you know that, like, I can't really do dairy, I'm a little sensitive to it. Oh, but I can eat cheese, I can eat yogurt, right? Something that's fermented, pre-digested. Difference between regular loaf of bread and sourdough, right? There's a pre-digestion, a processing of the food that allows us to be able to digest it, and oftentimes increases the nutrient content, right? Like sauerkraut is higher in vitamin C. Many ferments are way higher in B vitamins, protein, and so many other aspects that it is literally a key food group. And this is what we need to realize about these 4 food groups. And I would have argued you to the death about, like, but humans, we're not supposed to eat animals. Well, we are. And I challenge anyone, look at any culture around the world that doesn't eat from these 4 food groups. My wife was doing a lot of research around the eating of insects for a while. Which
I was meaning to talk to you about that, because I was getting into that for a while, and I started making bug burgers.
Right. Yeah, for sure. And so because people say, well, the Indian culture, right? They're vegetarian. Well, vegetarian, there's very few that are actually true strict vegan. So the Jains. So these are the people. It's a very specific sect within Hinduism where they wear the mask and they sweep in front of them. The idea is they don't want to, like, accidentally breathe in a bug or step on a bug. So they're very kind of conscious. And so it was in this book that my wife was reading about this study where many of them had immigrated to England from India. And so they moved over and they just kept eating the exact same diet, right? Like lentils, pulse, rice, veggies, that kind of thing. But many of them became anemic in that transition within a couple of years. And they're like, well, what's going on? The diet hasn't changed. Nothing has changed. What they investigate a little bit further is that the quality of food that they're getting in England was very clean in the sense that, it was all packaged, polished, clean, so on and so forth, versus in India, there was actually like a obviously significant presence of bugs, right? Bug fragments. And that was actually providing key nutrients like iron and B12 that they just didn't know that was more naturally in their diet. So critical. Wow. It doesn't, just because animals is a key food group, again, doesn't mean that you need to eat steak all day, every day, or even eat steak at all. It could be some sort of other influence, right? Whether it's insect, things like honey, whether it's eggs, milk, So ferments, absolutely key. And the other one, fungi, and the realm of mushrooms, which are a part of fungi. They're the fruiting bodies of fungi. Within the kingdom of fungi, we have, all the way from single cell yeast to these big, larger, what are called, the noble polypores, the tree mushrooms and the button mushrooms and everything in between have been both a source of food and medicine for humans throughout time. And, kind of case in point, there's a huge percentage of our pharmaceuticals, the medicine that we take today, even in our modern day and age, that has its origins from the fungal kingdom. And we can go back to a more natural source by literally eating yeasts and molds and fungi, as food and medicine. So that's the 4 food groups. If you can think of anything else outside of that that humans eat, I'm open to it. I mean, we can get a little bit more abstract and say, okay, there is actually a 5th food group, and it consists of 4 different things, which are the elements: earth, air, fire, and water. We can look at those as as a food group as well. But we'll leave it to those four for now for this discussion.
Awesome. And just touching on this bacteria and as a food group,
yeah,
it also obviously has an effect on what's going on inside our tummies.
Yes.
And how do you reckon that our microbiome affects our ecosystems?
Oh, yeah. Okay. Well, I know for sure that our external ecosystem affects our inner ecosystem, right? Depending on how diverse it is or how not diverse and sterilized it is. I think we are living through one of the great experiments right now in terms of the sterilization and the sanitization of our environment. It has been well documented that people living more traditionally closer to the land, what might be described as indigenous, they have not only higher amounts of bacteria, but greater diversity than those of us, living in the modern lifestyle, living in cities. And then, man, with the last 7 months and this kind of obsession around sanitizing and antibacterial and killing bacteria and viruses, we have yet to see the consequence of that. And hopefully we put 2 and 2 together, but I'm not so convinced that's going to happen so soon. So absolutely, there's a correlation, a connection between the external environment. Internal environment out? Well, internal environment out, I know for sure it does affect your mind and your psychology, that idea between the gut and brain connection. Your mood is influenced by that. And even that imbalance, the idea of like candida, which is a type of yeast that's naturally a part of our microbiome, will influence us to choose certain foods over another. Generally, it tends to be more sugary type foods. And then obviously our food choices affect and influence our outer world. And that's one of the biggest reasons I continue to stay with food. The fact that I started as vegetarian to try and help change the world, I still do. I 100% believe that our food choices are what can and will shape the world for better or worse, right? It's the most profound influence. We vote with our dollar, and no more powerful and potent than our food dollar, as well as our time and where we invest our energy.
Yeah. And stemming from that is like we have recently in contemporary society become obsessed with sterilization and making sure everything's clean. And that stems into, at least I've found since I've started fermenting foods, there's been a lot of people that go like, ew, like, no, that's been on the counter for like 2 weeks. It's like, I can't eat that. It's like, no, that's actually like really, really good for you. And so what are the common misconceptions that you come across around fermented foods, and how do you feel is the best way to get around those misconceptions?
Yeah, I think putting it in context, I've been teaching people how to ferment for probably, at least 15 years now. And there's always that hesitation, right? Even if we're familiar, right? There's always these cultural biases of, like if someone from the West looks at someone from the East eating this weird stringy bean curd called natto that smells like stinky socks and goes like, oh, like you eat that? Like, how can that be good? And someone from the East might look at someone from France and go look at their blue cheese and go like, oh, weird, like that smells, and how do you eat that? So we come with these cultural biases, but there's also this kind of intrepidation of like, oh, okay, is that, are you sure? Is that safe? And one of the things I do to just kind of like open that up is it is, right? And people have, again, every single culture without fail, there's no living human on the planet that doesn't include, intentionally or unintentionally, include bacteria as part of their diet. But there is that kind of natural like hesitation sometimes, and sometimes it's just cultural. Some of these foods that often end up being, the height of cuisine, tend to be more of an acquired taste. But when you get there, it's like, wow, it's amazing. So it just takes that kind of step forward to get over it and get into it. So I remind people have done this and continue to do it all around the world throughout time with less clean environment, like literally like dirt floors. It's like you have this wonderful, beautiful, clean, modern kitchen, you're going to be fine, right? People have done this on dirt floors throughout time, and it's okay. And what we need to do with fermentation is learn the conditions. I'm not really a big recipe guy per se. I love to approach things conceptually. Like I'd be a horrible baker because I'm not specific. When it comes to baking, you got to be pretty specific. But you're probably the same as me. Is like when you make a smoothie, when you make a soup, your oxtail soup. Like you've got the concept, the approach. It's like, okay, if I'm making a broth, I've got my idea. Here's how I do it. I add this, I add that, and you're on your way. So I love to approach things conceptually, and within fermentation, it's very much like that. Okay, if you're going to do any kind of what's called lacto fermentation, meaning utilizing lactobacillus or lactic acid creating bacteria, there's certain conditions that you want to create for them. And within that, you're good, you're safe, right? If you create enough of a saline environment with the right amount of salt, right? Salt, we know throughout time has helped control rot, and we can preserve things with salt. And it's playing with that percentage where we can allow and give rise to the good bacteria and allow them to grow, but reduce the kind of the negative and the bad bacteria so it doesn't spoil, it doesn't like rot. So you play with salt, you play with acidity, you play with aerobic versus anaerobic. And once you understand those principles, it becomes entirely liberating and so free, like you've experienced, of like, okay, good, I've got this. I'm no longer concerned in this area, in this realm. And then it becomes this area of like a lot of fun and play, achieving all these different flavors. So initially, absolutely, there can be intrepidation. And it even happens to me, right? I remember the first time, when I try something new, like tempeh, right? And I'd been fermenting for a long time. I was very confident, but tempeh, I was like, oh my gosh, like I've never seen white fuzzy mold, black mold. I usually associate that with like, no, you got to throw it, you got to toss it. But in tempeh, it's actually okay.
That's the good stuff.
Yeah.
Cool. In your book, you talked about a logical and common sense approach to making good food choices called food scope.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if you could talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, totally. That's great. And I did allude to it earlier, how I've been kind of talking so much about culture. That is one of those lenses. So food scope, it's an acronym, SCOPE. And I like to say, you can look at any food, any diet through these lenses and know if it's right for you, which is very helpful because I know I was once confused. I know so many people are still confused about what to eat. And we get mixed messages all the time. And I do personally as well. I still get tons of like, trying to people to influence me. I own a health food store, so every week there's a new product. Like, oh, you got to try out the latest and greatest superfood, right? Like, is that just marketing, or how do I sort through that? So this is a tool I've used both personally and professionally, and it is enlightening and it's liberating. But again, it's not rocket science. This type of wisdom is kind of at a very ground level that we should all be able to incorporate. So the first is S, which is science, right? In science, it can tell us what's in a food and what are its kind of effects on the body, positive, negative. Science is great. It's wonderful. It's a very good tool. Now, unfortunately, in our culture, society, we tend to praise science above and beyond everything else. It's kind of the great holy God. And, if it's not scientific, then, it's like my dad, like, I don't believe in herbs. Well, anyways, science, it's a great tool, but what I propose to you is that we need to look at it through all these lenses. We can't just rely on one. Cultural will take us the farthest, but there are still limitations within it. So science, it's great, it's wonderful. There's so much there, and we need to recognize that it does also have its limitations, especially food science. One of the criticisms of nutrition science is it's actually still pretty young. It's not that far developed or advanced. And, my response to that is like, well, that's okay, right? Like, how far do we need to take it, right? We can, yes, there's always more to learn, but the innate act of just nourishing and feeding ourselves, we don't need this high-tech level of science to be able to do that. Mm-hmm. So use science appropriately. It's great, it's wonderful, but obviously it has its limitations. culture, I think we've spent more than enough time talking about that, looking at food nutrition through a cultural lens, traditional cultures that have that wisdom. Now, is it the be all end all, right? I know a lot of people who are like, oh, maybe it's their own interpretation of what they think is a cultural diet, right? Like the primal diet, the paleo diet, I'm going to eat like a caveman, and it's like, okay, is that really how they ate? And the modern context, right? There's so many people that I know that are into the Weston A. Price, love Weston A. Price Foundation, and he was one of the greatest, kind of food nutrition researchers. One of the greatest books, physical nutrition, physical degeneration. I don't know, something about that title. It's off the top of my mind here. Fantastic book looking at traditional cultures, and that has really helped so many people to get back on track. And like, okay, I'm gonna eat like my ancestors. So I'm gonna, get up and I have my steak and my eggs and my bacon and my this and my that. And then they get in their car and they drive to the office and then they sit down in front of a computer all day and then drive home. And it's like, well, that's not actually how your ancestors lived, so it's not necessarily you're going to eat the same of quantity of of calories when you have a completely different lifestyle. So there's all that type of context. So there's some nuances within there to kind of put the cultural lens in perspective. And we also need to recognize, like I mentioned with ferments, is that there's cultural biases, right? From unfamiliarity. There was also limitations on culture in terms of time and space and access and their level of understanding. Of course, it can be improved. And so use it, but put them all. And that's maybe where science can come in. So science, culture, very valuable. And then the O is other people's opinions and experiences, right? Learning from others. We're social beings and we are influenced by others. And unfortunately, a lot of marketing and advertising takes advantage of that. It's probably why I love breakfast cereals so much, because Wayne Gretzky was on the package. And if he eats it, right? If he eats his Lucky Charms, then, it's good for me too, or Wheaties or whatever he was into.
You'll be the next top scoring NHL player if you just eat your Lucky Charms.
It's true, right? So, but we can learn so much from other people. I drink, spring water, wild water. I have no problem identifying and drinking wild water, like either out of a lake. I've done that a couple times, but more often than not, like literally right out of the ground. And I never would have done that had it not been a friend of mine, Danny Vitalis. Try it. Like, this is the best thing ever. I'd been raised to kind of fear wild water. Like can't drink wild water. But it took him. It was like his experience. And he said, this is the best thing ever. You just try it. It's all good. I'm still alive, right? I've done it too. So it's a massive lens that we can greatly benefit our journey by looking to others. And again, we need to put it in context, right? I mentioned I was a raw vegan for a couple of years, and for better or worse, I kind of dragged my family through that. And by my family, meaning my wife, and she was pregnant at the time, and then young child, breastfeeding. That, I will tell you, that is the absolute worst diet for a mother and a young child to be on. And unfortunately, we learned that the hard way. And I was so into what others were saying about, the raw vegan diet. But what I didn't do is I didn't stop and put it into context. I didn't say, hey, wait a minute, who are these people that are having these miraculous, healings and experiences on a raw vegan diet? Well, it turns out, most of them, it had been within a short time. They had discovered it. They'd gotten benefits. They'd written their books. They'd become experts within a very short period of time. It wasn't over the lifetime. It wasn't generationally. So I didn't make that connection. I didn't put it into context. And it was mostly, single males in their midlife, anywhere from 30 to 50. There were definitely some women and other things, but what really helped us get out of that was listening to the stories of other mothers that had been down that path going, yeah, made that mistake. Here's what happened, right? I got depleted. My child started having, teeth issues, So a very key lens that we need to, again, explore the breadth of it, apply this kind of critical thinking to, and it can really, really help us assess any food, any diet. And then the last part of that acronym of the food scope is P&E, personal experience. How does it work for you? yeah, and test it out, because great, science may say, hey, this food is loaded with these nutrients, it'll help you live long and reduce this and blah, 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 blah. Culturally, check, check, check. It's been revered. It's been consumed for a long time. Others are raving about it, but you try it and it's like, oh, no, not for me, not right now. The ferments, like that sauerkraut, I get, this kind of hive reaction. That's my experience. So ultimately, we got to go with that. But again, we can't just choose one lens. I can't go out in the forest and say, mushrooms, wild mushrooms, right? Like, forget what science says, forget what culture says. How about I try this one? Like, obviously, and that's why I describe this as intelligent eating. This idea of bringing together, the intellect with the intuition, and the food scope is kind of a lens to be able to do that.
Awesome. Well, thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
So we are classmates in the PDC from Verge. And even though we've only done just a little bit of that course, I'm wondering what you have taken from it and what you have applied to not just your own life, but your business and to food as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, for sure. Really, really enjoying it. And I know we've just kind of scratched the surface. So the biggest thing that sticks out for me is kind of this, like the systems thinking, how we're kind of, getting out of, what shall I call it? Like, just like I had to escape, kind of modern Western industrialized eating, I've had to escape modern Western industrialized thinking, having gone through the school system of kind of like learn, memorize, repeat, become a good factory worker. There's a lot of unlearning that needs to happen. And now that relearning, having a more holistic view and the systems thinking, and even what ties in with this whole kind of vegetarian sustainability, like, that was one of the biggest things that I've gotten from Rob Avis is, there's a degenerative way of being, and we can all point our fingers at that. And the next step is always being presented as, we need to be more sustainable. We need to achieve a sustainability, and Rob's saying like, no, that's actually still part of the paradigm of death and suffering. And, it's a losing battle. And I love this kind of new paradigm of the regenerative, right? That's what we need to achieve. And getting out of this way of thinking that humans are kind of a plague and a curse on the earth, and the best we can do is less harm, and the best we can do is just kind of neutralize our impact on the world. I love this thinking that we can actually contribute, we can actually regenerate, and I think that's been at the core of my business is to contribute. Even getting into business, I joke, I kind of call myself at times like, the hippie CEO. Like I come from this type of really kind of grassroots hippie mentality, but yet I've got a successful multi-million-dollar business, and it took a lot of kind of reprogramming of my mind to what is money, right, and what is community, and what is contribution, and merging those two and really being of value and of service. And I think that's where it intersects for me. And personally, in my own life, it's about the PDC. I'm under no illusion that I'm going to be like, self-sufficient and growing all my own food, even though I do see that, and I do, see that as a solution for the world, like we can solve all our problems, by gardening. I know I'll never be 100%, and I know that's not realistic for everyone either. But I do know the value of doing at least 1%. And so I'm taking assessment and stock of my own life, and I'm 10 steps down the path in terms of wild foraging and making my own food and medicine in my own kitchen. Disconnecting from the industrialized food system. But if I'm really honest with myself, I'm still pretty plugged in terms of relying on supply chains and this and that. And again, I may never ever get to 100%, but at least I can start, and on a really super small scale, for all the benefits that it involves, even if it's just one meal, that if I can grow myself, there's huge value in that. So I'm moving it to 2%, or wherever I feel like I'm at. It's more than that, but you know what I mean. And I'm looking at and the other thing that permaculture, getting into that course, has really opened up, and I knew it was, but it's really opening it. It's not just about gardening, right? It's about all the systems of our life and what we need to kind of thrive and survive in this world, and looking at how I can make them better and regenerative.
Yeah, absolutely. It's such an eye opener. And even for someone who, like myself, I've been involved with Verge even before taking my PDC, and then been reading a lot about permaculture in the last, I don't know, couple of years, more than a couple, actually like 5, half a decade. And then getting into the course and just 4 days of intense, just was like, whoa, this is awesome. This is,
Yeah,
it's empowering.
yeah, definitely.
Well, just I've got so many questions actually. You're touching on eating the rainbow.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if you have a favorite color combination of foods you like to explore with.
Yeah, well, in life and in a non-food form, I love purple and green. There's nothing better than that. And but if I put that in a food context, purple, I actually instantly think of cacao. Chocolate is actually a purple food. Those anthocyanins, we hear that it's very high in antioxidants. Fresh chocolate is a vibrant purple. And then as it goes through processing, it tends to oxidize a little bit and it appears more brown.
Yeah.
Yeah, and green is actually a color that doesn't mix very well with purple. So if I say chocolate spinach, it's like, no, it doesn't really go together. There's not a ton of green things that go with chocolate. There's mint, of course. There's things like spirulina, of course. Yeah, that's what immediately comes to mind when I think of like color combinations.
Cool. And elixirs. What is your definition of an elixir, and what was your first elixir?
Yeah, okay, cool. So my kind of technical definition is an elixir is an alchemical vehicle for the delivery of food and medicine. And it speaks to this idea of let food be thy medicine, medicine be thy food. It's the practical application of that. And maybe a less wordy, less technical demonstration of that it is your morning coffee and smoothie combined. Not literally, because that would be horrible, but intelligently and crafted in a way that you have, right, the functional aspects of that, right? So coffee, and it could be anything. I'm not personally a coffee drinker, but I love tea. I love stimulants. I love things like mate and green tea, right? There's a function that hot beverage is playing, be it just literally to stimulate us or to chill us out or to, be antioxidants or reduce inflammation or pain, right? There's so many functions that herbs play, in the idea of the nice warm herbal beverage as a tea. And then the smoothie, its function is like nutrients, like it's nourishment for that day, right? It's the grab and go, like put all your nutrients in for the day, like here's my smoothie, I'm out the door kind of thing. So practically, functionally, you're able to bring that together. And I don't know my very first elixir ever, but I can easily answer it in the sense that what brought it together for me was, again, I was in my vegetarian days, I was making nut milks, right? The idea of like, make your own almond milk, and, oat milk is now the trendy thing, right? You take nuts, seeds, oats, whatever it is, blend it with water, strain it, and there you go. There's your plant milk. And the first kind of like connection clue that led me down the path of elixirs was, oh, okay, instead of water, what if I use herbal tea? So I could use chaga tea, I could use nettle tea, I could use any kind of tea. And what guides my decision making, here's another little kind of hook for people, is flavor, function, feeling. So this is kind of my window, my key to alchemy, right? When you think about like alchemy and you're crafting, whether it's elixirs or beers or anything, right? It's flavor, function, feeling. Flavor, pretty obvious, right? Are we having chocolate? Are we going bitter? Are we doing sweet? This, that, the next. Function, I mentioned a little bit about thinking about like, okay, what do I need for the day? I'm going to need some support. I'm going in for a test, right? It's like permaculture day. I need brain power. I need focus.
Yeah.
That could be the function. Feeling, right? Well, I want things to be nice and even and steady. Or maybe it's like, long day in the garden. It's like, boom, oh man, like sore muscles. I need something to kind of relax and just like, take me down a notch, right? And maybe that's the feeling. And then based upon, each of our understandings of food and herbs, you can intelligently craft elixirs to, meet all those. First and foremost, flavor's got to be there. Though I do know people who will forego flavor for function and for feeling. But in this day and age, especially as you're trying to influence people to like, no, this is good. Like you got to incorporate elixirs into your life. Like they taste great. Flavor, function, feeling. You can begin to intelligently craft them. So that's where I started, was blending, herbs, having this herbal base to my nut milks. It just opened up a whole new level. Now we're like stacking functions. Now I'm really truly bringing together food and medicine into one. That's the practical application of it.
Awesome. And you've written a book on elixirs called Elixir Life. And where can people get this book?
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. So when I was doing the research, I'd been making elixirs for a long time. I had even begun to kind of commercialize them in the sense that we were the first elixir bar in Canada. You would come into Light Cellar, which at that time was just a little hole in the wall shop. And it was kind of like, elixir of the week. And we'd just change it up all the time. We were just like randomly making different drinks, and whatever we had was whatever we had. And then slowly we started to build a menu. We created an elixir bar, full menu, and people were like, wow, like, can I get your recipe? And I'm kind of more of the, we talk about what am I taking from permaculture and what do I also do in business? I'm open source in that way. Like, sure, here's my recipes, literally. So I wrote the book, and as I was considering writing the book, I was like, well, has anyone ever done this? And so I went like on Amazon. I was like, elixir books, right? And I got, science books and romance novels, and like couldn't find one. So it's one of the first of its kind in print, again, as I think of and conceive of elixirs. So it's hot beverages, cold beverages. There's 30 different recipes. They're sweet, they're savory. And more importantly, what we've been talking about today is that concept of like, okay, how do I build it? How do I make it my own? Because, I already mentioned, I'm not a recipe guy. I get it. There are specific recipes. We want to, when we're first learning something, we want to learn via a recipe. And sometimes like you've nailed it. It's like, wow, that was sweet. Let's recreate that. So there's always a time and a place for a recipe. So that's the recipe book. And anyone getting that will be able to learn how to craft their own elixirs, become their own elixir crafter. And you can get it through me directly at lightcellar.ca. That's LIGHTCELLAR. It's also available on Amazon and Barnes and Noble. And if you're in the States, it's Amazon's a good option, but I think the Canadian version of it's quite expensive. So just contact me directly, lightcellar.ca.
Awesome. I've got one more question for you before we get on to some questions from the audience.
Okay.
So this is a bit of a longer form one. So we were talking earlier about how it's strange and maybe not so beneficial that we've become averted to weird and gross things, which may have put us at more risk of things. And so I wanted to get your take on the following story. So about 230 years ago, in the late 1790s, Edward Jenner, a British doctor, made an astute observation. He noticed that while smallpox was running rampant through Gloucestershire, which is where Gloucester cheese is from. God, that's a hard word to say fast. He noticed that all the milkmaids who were more susceptible to cowpox expressed far fewer cases of smallpox. And so he inoculated a young boy, James Phipps, with the pus from a cowpox blister from a milkmaid's hand. And 2 months later, he inoculated the boy, James Phipps, with a lethal dose of smallpox. He was fine. This was the first vaccine ever made. And the word vaccination actually comes from the Latin word vaccinia, which is the Latin word for cowpox. And so in this historical story, the vaccine was already out there. It was in nature. Mm-hmm. And so what are we doing wrong, in your mind, in this contemporary setting when our entire lives have been seemingly run by this little strand of RNA and protein? What can we be doing better? And do we need to be eating more dirt? Like, is that
Yeah.
what it comes down to?
Yeah, literally. Right. And, there's always that analogy given of, the pregnant woman, right? That's like suddenly gets all these like weird, crazy cravings. Again, I think that speaks to the intelligence of the body. Sometimes it's not always, spot on. I don't think we can always, especially in the kind of the state that we're in, if you told me as a 16-year-old, like, just, follow your gut, eat whatever you want, right? It would have just been, more donuts and Pop-Tarts and that kind of thing. Had kind of lost my way, eating very unnaturally, living unnaturally. So it was kind of this journey back to natural foods, but also a kind of calibration of my microbiome, right? Getting those populations back up, a more diverse amount of species, and then things like the candida in check, right? The candida, which would have been telling my brain like, oh yeah, you want some sugar, get some more sugar. So getting that back in check, then you can, and eating natural foods, you can rely on your gut. You can eat more intuitively, and it's a wonderful place to be, right? To follow your gut more than nutrition trends. This is ultimately where we want to end up, but we need to kind of remove some of those unnatural foods, artificial foods that have chemicals that begin to mess with our brain, right? Things like MSG, things like, red dye number 5. It's hard to be an intuitive eater with those types of influences and in your microbiome. So I think building the microbiome is one of the most important things. And it's as simple as like just starting to get in the ferments, right? And begin to diversify the types of probiotic foods, and start anywhere, right? Maybe it is sauerkraut, maybe it is kombucha, maybe it is tempeh, whatever it is. And as we do, we're going to begin to increase and expand that microbiome and really getting what I like this term, and I've used it for years, friendly ferments, right? Like getting friendly with the friendly ferments, the probiotics, the good bacteria, and not being a bacteria phobe in that sense. And not, right now, like especially now, we're in this kind of, there's almost seems to be two camps, right? It's like, terrain theory versus germ theory. And actually, I think it's a bit of both, right? It's like we do need to build our terrain that we are resistant to microbes, but we also need to be intelligent and, not expose ourselves to what could be harmful microbes. I do lean more on the terrain theory side, that, and one analogy is the mosquito doesn't breed the swamp breeds the mosquito. It's the ideal environment for mosquitoes to grow, right? It's the environment that creates those conditions. And if we change that, it won't allow that. And so I think it's a bit of both, but definitely I'm leaning more on the terrain. Another great example, and I'll reference Michael Pollan, and you might remember this from the series Cooked, where he talks about that woman who in the States is a nun, and she's making cheese in the old fashioned way using wood. Well, that's a big no-no in the health inspector world. Everything's got to be sterilized and sanitized. And where they took 2 batches of the milk to turn it into cheese. One was with the stainless steel, everything's sterilized, so on and so forth. And then the other traditional method that had this inoculation of the culture from, successive generation of cheese making, batch after batch, that was permeated with this type of bacteria that when they added the, not lethal, but, huge amounts of E. coli, the one that was done traditionally, there was no trace of that E. coli. So that's a huge thing, is that we need to embrace, the good bacteria, bring that into our life, whether that is literally eating dirt, geophagy. There's actually a technical term, it's what we do as humans. So that's that 5th food group, earth, air, fire, water. We need to recognize that, of course, we do air, our most vital nutrient, water, our most second vital nutrient, but the fire, that meaning heat, sun's energy, vitamin D, that kind of a thing, but also earth, that is a key critical food group, and it plays a role in not only introducing, soil-based organisms, these bacteria, right, like don't wash your carrots, don't scrub that cabbage down before you make sauerkraut or eat it, right? Culture that stuff. That being said, I try not to choose food like this, but if it was, you hear about, okay, spinach contamination and all that stuff. That's why, again, like source becomes really key.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're culturing it, as that woman did with the cheese, very oftentimes those types of microbes can't exist. So we can, by literally eating dirt, we're getting good microbes, but we've got to have good soil for that to happen and be effective. And then earth, in terms of things like clays and salts as well, but specifically clays, works as a detox mechanism, right? Like other animals, other species specifically eat clays. Like birds will eat clay to help neutralize some of the plant toxins.
Wow.
Yeah.
Cool. Have you ever eaten clay?
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, and again, it could be like literally like right out of the earth. Most of us, how we're going to approach that is, okay, you go to the health food store and you get your bentonite clay or different types of clay.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, so that's an example.
Cool. We have 2 questions from the audience. From Mark McLaughlin. Sorry, Mark. He says, I love how people are talking about the gut microbiome and the soil microbiome. I have not heard a dialogue comparing and contrasting the two. Any recommendations, resources, or your own personal opinion?
Yeah, absolutely. So probably the best voice on that topic, who I love, is Dr. Zach Bush. I can't think of off the top of my head what his website is. It's probably just zachbush.com. You can find him on all the social media. And he's been a real pioneer from the real kind of science and medical side of the microbiome, but he's very passionate and very linked and connected to the soil and being a steward of the soil with the farmers. And he's probably the best resource for that.
Okay, cool. Yeah, and they talked a lot about in the PDC, the soil microbiome, which was an eye-opener for me. It was quite cool.
Yeah.
And his second question is, what are some common and beneficial herbs I could incorporate into my life for personal health, as well as grow for my market gardening customers?
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, when it comes to include for beneficial health, I'm going to go broad and I'm going to say the best category of herbs, because there's many different types of herbs and they all have all different types of benefits. But the category or the classification of what are called adaptogens, those are probably the best place to start. And then you have many choices within that. Adaptogens was a term, I talk about it in my book and kind of give the definition, but kind of simply, they literally help you to adapt. They also have a non-specific action on the body. They are dual directional. They work on the whole kind of master gland system, endocrine system, and they don't just do one thing, right? It's not just a herb for blood pressure. And even if it does affect the blood pressure, it's this idea of dual directional. So let's say you have high blood pressure, you need to be able to bring it down, or it's low blood pressure, you need to bring it up. There are certain herbs that only work one way, one direction. And there are kind of we'll call them an elite special class of herbs that are dual directional and often have been described as the adaptogens, depending on the system it's come from. Like within the Chinese herbal system, they have what are called, the superior herbs and then the inferior herbs. And the inferior herbs work more on that principle of everything is medicine, everything's poison. The only difference is dose. And those are kind of more advanced level. You want to work with a practitioner, you really kind of help guide you because they're unidirectional versus these adaptogens. They're very safe to take every day. The effects are cumulative and they build, and they're non-specific on the body, and they're more about helping your body to adapt. So I would focus on the world of adaptogens, and a lot of people are getting into that. So you'll see that it's like very trendy. You read the health food magazines, they're talking about, adaptogens, things like holy basil, things like ashwagandha, rhodiola, reishi, and you can begin to see that coming out into the marketplace as well. So, picking a herb obviously that works in your climate and your bioregion. To grow. There's a lot of mushroom growers out there, and that is a huge industry, both for culinary as well as medicinal mushrooms. But there's lots of kind of roots like ashwagandha, shatavari, astragalus that can and will grow. If you're in the Alberta area, and of course things like holy basil as well.
Awesome. We have one more question from Mark, actually. He said, Malcolm talked about elixirs, but can he briefly describe what spegirix is and the difference between the two?
Oh, yeah, spegirix.
Spegirix.
Yeah, spegirix. So that's a very specific method. It's like an alchemical herbal preparation. And we've got one of our staff members here. His nickname is the Alchemist. His name is Brandon or Snoop, and he's actually really specialized in this area. And it's about taking all forms of the plant, and kind of the extra special addition that they do in the kind of medicine preparation is they'll burn the plant and get the ash, and then they're getting like the mineral body element and add it in.
Cool.
Yeah, it's more obscure in kind of the realm of herbalism, but it's powerful, and you most often find them in like tincture form. And it's different. So when it comes to how does that compare to an elixir, some might describe a spegiric tincture as an elixir. So I lay no claim on what is, well, that's not elixir. No, I mean, elixir is whatever. There's many different forms and definitions and takes on it. I have kind of my take and interpretation and how I express that. And I can also see how a spegiric could be described as an elixir in a much broader definition, right? The elixir of life, help you attain youth and vitality.
Awesome. Cool. Well, that wraps it up for all the viewer questions. And thank you, Mark. Through your engagement, you've actually just won the DIY kombucha book. So we'll get your contact information pretty soon, and we'll send you the ebook. And before we close up, we have two awesome events to talk about. The first is the online PDC through Verge. And so if anyone's interested in that, you just head over to vergepermaculture.ca. And this starts at the end of November. It's all online, all via Zoom. And you have an awesome event coming up.
Yeah, all right. Starting November 9th, it's just days away. This is the Calgary Fermentation Festival. It's going to be the third annual, and we normally do them in person. We've done this will be our fourth fermentation festival. They've all been in person, but hey, in the day and age that we're at, we have shifted to online, which has some silver linings. It's amazing. It's incredible. So we're reducing barriers of time and space. So wherever you are in the world, you can join us, and it also allowed us to expand and open up who we have as a presenter. So we have the man who is, I like to say, it's like he is more responsible for teaching like more people on the planet how to ferment than anybody else, and that's Sandor Katz. So yeah, Mitch has got the book right there.
Yeah, this is just like absolutely covered in brine and weird crumbs and just weird stuff.
Yeah, so he's an incredible resource. So he's part of the festival. We've got some naturopathic doctors. We have local chefs and a whole host of experts that really the whole goal, and we designed it specifically that, it's, whereas the festival might be a whole day, the last thing we want you to do is like sit down on a Saturday and a Sunday and look at a computer screen. So we've got it very intelligently designed where it's weeknight evenings, short, intensive focus sessions, start at 7, start at 8, 2 different sessions an evening. If you can't make the live, no worries, you'll get the recording. But if you can, then it's going to be interactive. You can type in your questions, and we're all about empowering you with the tools, the knowledge, the confidence to be able to ferment your own food and drinks. And we have a variety of recipes that you'll learn. You will become an expert after just 10 days of knowledge and beginning to implement it in your own life with the recipes and everything you learned.
Awesome. And where can people find more information about that?
So that's lightcellar.ca. Click the kind of live events tab, and then you'll see Ferment Fest there.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for talking to me today. And I'm quite excited. I'm going to sign up for the Fermentation Festival, so I'm quite excited to learn lots. And I learned a lot today. And thank you again.
Yeah, for sure. Right on. Thanks for having me on, Mitch. It was good.
Alrighty, Malcolm. We'll see you in the future. Have fun till then. All right.
Yeah. Bye for now.
All right.